Okay, so we're going to start. So my voice is a little off today. You'll have to, and you all in the YouTube land, you'll have to forgive me. We're on page 158. And we're going to start on the second page. So this is the epilogue to the cave story. And it ends in a very interesting way. So they come out of the cave, and he's gone to the bathhouse. He's had his massage. And we talked last week about his growth spiritually is that he now becomes a student as opposed to a teacher, because a student is in a higher level of spirituality than a teacher. And also that now he can ask more questions than he used to ask. So it's interesting definitions of spiritual growth. First of all, you become a student, open to learning as opposed to a teacher. And also you learn to ask more questions, not fewer questions. So the world is more complicated and not less complicated. All right. And then here's the final step in spiritual growth is what we see right now, which is quite interesting. So page 158, second paragraph. Amar, he says, Ho'il v'itrachish nisa, because a miracle was made for me, Ezel atkin milta, I'll go and I'll fix something. That's literally what it means. I will tikkun, I will fix something. Out of reward for my own, because I was rescued. I will go fix something. Dichtiv, and there's a scriptural reference for that. You know, I have inspiration for that from this verse. Vayavo Yaakov Shalem. Jacob came to the city called Shalem, and you'll know that we talked about this last week. The rabbis make a play on words on the word Shalem, which is the name of the city, but also means whole, full, healed. So Jacob comes out of his own trauma, just like Shimon comes out of his own trauma, whole and healed. Ve'amar Rav, and Rav says Shalem begufo, because Rav explains it means whole in his body, Shalem b'mamono, whole in his property, Shalem b'torato, and whole, totally healed in his Torah, spiritual healing. And then the next verse in the Torah, Vayichan et pnei ha'ir, so he graced the city, which we interpret here as meaning he did something good for the city. Amar Rav. So Rav says, what does that mean? Remember talking about Jacob, not Shimon, but this is this is Shimon's inspiration. What Jacob did now is going to be Shimon's inspiration. Amar Rav matbea tikein lahem. So Rav says he made for them coinage. So he starts a monetary system for them. He gives them the ability to buy and sell in the marketplace. Shmuel Amar Shvakim Tikin Lam, and Shmuel said he made for them actual markets. He made the markets. Now, of course, the irony here I talked about last week is exactly what Shimon had critiqued about the Roman Empire is what Jacob does. He creates coinage, he creates marketplaces, and this is part of Shimon's spiritual growth. That becomes the model now for Shimon, who suddenly embraces this worldly attitude towards spirituality, including coins and marketplaces. And Rabbi Yochanan says he made for them bathhouses. If you remember, bathhouses are one of those things that he complained about with the Roman Empire. So they make these bathhouses because they're so bodily spoiled. Now suddenly Shimon likes bathhouses and thinks those can be important because Jacob actually created those for the city of Shalem. So Amar. So now Shimon says. So now we just studied that verse. As Shimon studies that verse and understands that Jacob, what he tikkuned, what he fixed, was the ability for that city to enjoy the fruits of the modern Roman occupation, modern technological society. So now Shimon says, Ika milta debai latkune. So now Shimon says, in this city where he's at right now, is there something that needs fixing? I can imagine my grandfather saying something like that. My grandfather was really good with his hands. Come into a room and say, "Hey, something in here need fixing." He'd have his tools because I can fix it. But Shimon is talking on a deeper level. He's not just going to fix the basketball hoop that's broken. He's going to fix something else. So they said to him, "Amrulo, ika duchda the eat base fake tuma." They said there's a place where there's a safek tuma, where it's a place where there's doubtful impurity. So doubtful impurity means they don't know. Tumah they're talking about here is the tumah from a dead body. In other words, there's a place where they're not sure. There used to be a cemetery here, but we're not sure if there used to be a cemetery there. Now, what difference does it make? If there was a cemetery there, then Kohanim, then priests, wouldn't be allowed anywhere near it. And if it's a marketplace, then it excludes the priest from the marketplace. So that's what we need here. You're a rabbi? You want to try to fix something? Help us with this place. We don't know whether it's tumah or not. And since we don't know, we're keeping priests out of there. Because we don't know for sure. We need to know for sure. Are priests allowed there or not? Okay. V'itle tzaro kohanim lapuke. So it's difficult. It's troublesome for priests in our community. They don't know whether they're allowed to go there or not. So in general, with the implication is that they're not going to go there. Although it's doubtful. If we could just have a ruling, then we would know for sure, and then we could say no marketplace there. Or if it's not a cemetery, then we can go there. We just don't know. And you're a rabbi, you can tell us because you've got the knowledge to be able to tell us whether a place can be whether a place is pure or not. I was just thinking also, it happens every once in a while in Israel that archaeologists come across things that may or may not be bones. Right. And if they're bones, then it's an ancient cemetery. If it's an ancient cemetery, you have to leave it alone. There's all sorts of rules. Priests can't come anywhere near it. So they tie the city up in knots because the digging has to stop totally. And but it's not officially a cemetery, so they don't know what to do with it. So here it's not an archaeological dig. Here it's actually a marketplace, or a public thoroughfare, and they don't know whether there's a cemetery there or not. And Shimon's going to fix that. He's going to decide once and for all. And what's interesting is how he does it. Amar. So he says, Ika inishti ada di chazek hachatara. So is there a person here that knows for sure whether there's chazaka? Chazaka is an assumption. Is there somebody that knows for sure that this is not a cemetery, that it's a place of purity? So is there a witness? Maybe an old guy. That's what they're asking. Is there an old guy that's been around for a while that knows, no, this has never been a cemetery? Amar le hahusava. They found an old guy. The same Hebrew word for grandfather, but that means an old man. They found an old man. Kan kitzetz ben Zakkai tumse truma. I remember, this is what the old guy says, I remember when Ben Zakkai is a generation before, and he would do truma here. So he would separate truma crops. And so truma, goes to the priests. So if Ben Zakkai was doing truma crops separating in those days, in this place, we know for sure it's not a cemetery. So we know for sure he at least assumed that it was a place of purity. So it must be a place of purity. Got the answer. Avad iu nami hachi. So what Shimon does is he does the same thing. To show the people that this is a place of purity, he separates truma right there, saying it's totally safe, it's fine for a priest to come here. So it would be as if, some people think, hey, that's a treif dish, and Rabbi Shimon, who's a religious authority, eats off the treif dish. And the people all say, hey, that can't possibly be treif, because Rabbi Shimon, who is a religious authority, he ate off of it. That's what he does. So he gives the chazaka, the assumption of purity, by demonstrating it himself. Okay? So you think that's it? He fixed it. Okay, then he makes a ruling. Kol hechad dahave kashe. Any place where the ground is kashe, hard, Tare says that we're going to assume is a pure place because it means there hasn't been anybody digging to make a cemetery. Any place where the soil is soft, Sine. We assume that's a cemetery, and he puts signs, and now it's all clear. So there's sufficient place for the priest to go where it's not a cemetery, but also it's very clear now. There's no doubt anymore. This is a cemetery. Stay away from there. So he does a really good thing for that city. And interestingly, of course, ironically, is his doing that allows the city to practice commerce in a fuller way, and commerce was exactly what he was critiquing earlier at the beginning of the story. Okay. What's interesting also is that I think it's fascinating. What he ends up showing is that you can assimilate both the realm of spirituality, which is purity and impurity, stay away from the cemetery because that's a religious obligation, but he also allows for the existence of a thriving marketplace, because I will show you right here is where you can have your marketplace, where priests, everybody can participate. So he assimilates the values of the spiritual world, which are mitzvot, purity, impurity, with the values of the marketplace, and that's what he's learned in the cave, how important both existences are. Is that clear? Okay, so let's keep going. Because you think it's over. Somebody makes a halachic ruling, it's not over. Because these are Jews that we're dealing with. So just because someone makes a halachic ruling doesn't mean that magically everybody accepts it. I mean, that's that's what all rabbis have to deal with. Amar hahu sava, the same sava now. So the same old man who actually helped to make the ruling now protests the ruling. Oh no! This always happens. So a rabbi makes a fairly liberal ruling. What's the fairly liberal ruling? That this place is in fact not a cemetery. So the priests, can go there. So some old man in the congregation says, "Wait a second. How can we allow these liberal rulings. These like even Shimon, who's considered, he spent 13 years in a cave, and he's considered the great religious authority. Even he doesn't have the credibility to convince everybody. So the Sava says,
this is the
same guy. Right, that's right. He doesn't have to be consistent. He's just he's upset that Shimon, the Shimon's coming in and he's making all of these rulings, liberal rulings. All right. Tiher ben Yochai bet hakfarot. He says Ben Yochai is. Are you telling me that Ben Yochai that's the rabbi? Ben Yochai is purifying an entire cemetery. Well, wait a second. You just told us it wasn't a cemetery. But he's saying, well, we had thought it was a cemetery. Are you saying these liberal rabbis, this reform rabbi, sorry, right, this rabbi could come in and tell us a cemetery is now pure? So he's casting aspersions sarcastically on the whole enterprise of trying to liberalize that place and make it open to the marketplaces. Now, of course, Ben Yochai doesn't take this lying down, so he responds. Amarle, so he says to him, Ilma lo ayiti manu. So first of all, you were with us in the ruling. Yeah. I relied on your testimony for the ruling. But even if that wasn't the case, afilo ayita imanu velo nimneti imanu. But you were there with us. But even if you weren't there, you still voted for it. So you accepted it. Yafeh ta'omer. Okay, so it would be okay then if you weren't there and you voted against it. Okay, I can understand your objection because we permit objections. But wait a second, you were there all along. And you were counted among us in accepting this ruling. What you're causing, this is his statement here. I mean, it's his comparison, his metaphor. Now that you're disagreeing with me, even though you were there and accepted the ruling initially, the people will say, Yomru, zonot mifarkosot zo et zo. Even prostitutes, that's what zonot, even prostitutes help each other apply makeup. This is what happens when you throw our rulings into disrepute. Then the people, look, halakhic rulings are only as strong as their power of persuasion. We don't have a police force that's going to come and enforce our halakhic rulings. They're only as powerful as our force of persuasion. And the people are only going to be persuaded if we as a community stand behind them. If we don't, if we start arguing among ourselves, then they're going to say, well, these guys are just like a bunch of prostitutes. In fact, they're worse than prostitutes, because prostitutes at least support each other. Prostitutes are in competition with each other, but at least they support each other. They help each other with their makeup. Rabbis, they can't even support each other. One makes a ruling, and the other one automatically is making fun of it. That's what happens. So, and it's actually in some ways a very profound expression of a fear in this system. Remember, the system is a sort of a free-for-all, because there's no pope and there's no police force. So rabbis make particular rulings. But if rabbis are making these rulings and we as a community can't gather behind the rulings, then our audience, the audience are the Jewish population in general, they're going to disrespect us. Right. And they're going to say, look, these rabbis can't get along, so the whole system must be messed up. Even prostitutes can get along, and these guys can't get along. Even prostitutes support each other in their rulings, in their profession, the oldest profession. But these rabbis can't support each other. They're always sort of picking at each other. It makes us all look bad. That's what Shimon's saying. You're making us all look bad in that. Yeah.
Joe, they want to hear it.
Sounds like Congress.
Congress is
why it has such a low rating.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it sounds like a lot of different. Look, the issue here is that this kind of fine line between democracy, allowing for dissent, and the whole thing being a joke, where nobody knows what to do. And so Shimon's saying, Shimon, who, in his spiritual growth suddenly knows how to ask all sorts of questions, says we can't take that too far. At some point, there has to be a consensus around our rulings in day-to-day life. Otherwise, no one's going to listen to us. That's kind of what he says. Otherwise, we will be in such disrepute that no one will listen to us. Because remember, the danger is not that we're going to be so liberal that people are going to start thinking a cemetery is actually pure. People are going to say, look, who cares? In the end, who cares? Cemetery, not a cemetery? I'll walk wherever I want to walk. Suddenly Torah won't have any authority. It doesn't have authority unless we, the rabbis, are actually respectful of each other. Once it doesn't have authority, then who cares what I eat? Pig, not pig, who cares? The only reason I care is because I respect the system. Once it looks like the system is in disrepute because you guys can't get along, then the whole thing falls into disrepute. So you could say that about Congress. You could say it about religious life in America. You could
say about kashrus.
Yeah, sure.
Whose hechsher is the kosher one?
Right. So if it's just a game where different rabbis are arguing with each other, we can opt out. Who cares? I mean, it looks like they're just arguing over silly things. I'll do something else with my life. All right.
This is reminiscent of a situation I was dealing with a fellow once who was doing a development, and as they dug into the development, they found what could be Native American bones.
Yeah.
So of course the tribe leaders came out and protested and the whole thing, and it would never reach the courts because when the developer offered the people money for some cause of theirs, all of a sudden priests came out from the tribe and they did a few prayers and they declared everything was okay.
Okay. Yeah. So they found a way to do it. That's sort of what Shimon does here. Mm-hmm. He finds a way. Half the cemetery is not a cemetery. By the way, they never knew whether it was a cemetery or not. There was just a rumor that there was a cemetery. They don't even have bones. If they'd found bones in this instance, it would have been clear it was a cemetery. But it's just a rumor. And so he's got to deal with the rumor. And he deals with the rumor by saying this part was a cemetery because of the soil, and this part's not a cemetery. But there's a clear path so the Kohanim can go through it and participate in the marketplace.
Well, wasn't this near a known cemetery?
No, it's just all the information we have is in the story, but all the story gives us was a rumor. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yomru, so people will say, Zonot mefakar sot zo et zo, tamidei chachamim lo kol shekain. So if prostitutes can support each other, why can't the rabbis? All right. Now, Yahav be'enei. So Shimon gave him in the eye. Now, Shimon was the guy you didn't want to get the eye from him. Because if you remember earlier in the story, there's a point where he casts his eye at something and burns it up. So it's no joke getting the eye from him. So Shimon gives him the eye. But Shimon's emotions are very powerful physical forces. So, Yahiv be'enei v'nach nafshei. And he died. The old man died. Now, maybe he died of old age. But that would be a pretty big coincidence. So Shimon's a weird figure in this, and certainly volatile. But Shimon looks at him, and he dies. Nifak l'shuka. So now he goes to the marketplace. So the marketplace, of course, was the thing that in that city that he allowed to flourish because of his new ruling. Who does he run into? Chazeh Lehuda ben Geri. He sees Judah, the son of converts. So Judah, the son of converts, if you remember, he's the guy that starts off this whole story because he's the guy that informs the Romans that Shimon had said bad things about him. And he provokes the story because we wonder, why do we call him Judah the Big Mouth? And we find out this is why we call him Judah the Big Mouth. So this is, I don't know, maybe it's years later. It's years later, and he sees the guy that had actually informed on him. And he sees him in the marketplace, Yehuda. Amar, Adayin yesh lazeh ba'olam. Is this guy, yesh lazeh, actually, this thing, he's still living? Like, this guy's still alive? I was thinking it's like somebody that just kind of walks in the marketplace and he sees somebody who tortured him for years and he's not in jail. It's like, what are you doing out? Or, Jews that saw Nazi, guards suddenly out. Like, you hear stories about that. What are you doing out? So Shimon looks at him and saying, is this guy still alive? Uh-oh. Natan bo einav. He looks at him. He gives him a look. Shimon gives him a look. Now it's even more dramatic. The asahu gal shel atzamot. And he made of him a pile of bones in an instant. Okay. These are folk tales. And so I wouldn't look for, physical facts here, but it's an interesting story. So that's the end. End of the story. Yes, it's a strange ending because at first you want to think there's real spiritual growth, right? Yeah. Where Shimon actually sees the broader picture. Sure. You read till the end, you see he's still an angry guy with powers,
killing people,
and you want to be very careful about getting on his bad side. Yeah. There's an implication that these people, that Yehuda was an informer, so the Talmud's sort of side. The storyteller here is saying he deserved to die, that Yehuda. Because he's the one that turned him in. Now, the old man that disagreed with him, that's a different right. Okay. All right, so we're done with that story. We're going to go to the next page and completely changing the subject now. We've come to a new Mishnah. We're also coming to the end of this chapter. We've been doing this chapter now for, like 4 or 5 months. So we're going to finish the chapter pretty soon. By
the end of the year?
Which year?
Yeah. All right. This happens to be a famous Mishnah. This is a Mishnah that's incorporated into the Friday night service. Okay? So we don't actually chant it, but you see it in our prayer book. Okay. Matniti, Mishnah. Shlosha dvarim tzarich adam lamar b'toch beito erev Shabbat im chashicha. There are three things you have to say. You have to pronounce them physically. This is very important. It doesn't say these are three things you must do, although that's the implication. The three things that you have to ask yourself, have I done these on Friday? Erev Shabbat means Friday before dark. Okay, that's what it means. Im chashicha, right before dark. Here's what you have to ask yourself. Isartem, did you tithe? You have to tithe before Shabbat. Tithing is giving 10% of your produce to the priests. Eravtem, did you set up the Eruv? We'll talk about what Eruvs are later, but Eruvs are, mostly it's a thing that you put around a community so you can carry stuff. A thread, like we have in this neighborhood in La Jolla. Hidliku et haner. Did you light the candle, which becomes the Shabbos candle? Okay, this is right before dark. Remember, you light the candles before Shabbos, right? 20 minutes before Shabbos. So you light the candles before Shabbos. So this becomes approximately 20 minutes before sunset. Sorry. You asked. You have to say that. It's a ritual. You're supposed to say these things to remind yourself, have I done them? Presumably because if you haven't, there's enough time for you to do them. Okay? Safek chashicha, safek eno chashicha. All right, what if you don't know whether it's dark? It's at that twilight moment. You don't know if it's dark, but you don't know if it's light. Okay? In me'asrim et avadai, you don't tithe the stuff that you know for sure that you haven't tithed. That's the vadai. Ve'ein matbilim et hakelim. You don't immerse your dishes in the mikvah. Okay? You don't have to do that every Shabbat, by the way, but if you have new dishes, you're supposed to take them to the mikvah. So you don't do that if you're not sure whether Shabbat started or not. Ve'ein madlikin et hanerot. You don't light Shabbos candles if you're not sure it's Shabbos or not. Aval, but you do me'asrim et hadamai u'me'arvim v'tomnim et hachamim. But you can tithe something called damai. Damai is stuff, the doubtful tithe. You don't remember whether you tithed it or not. If you're not sure whether you tithed it or not, you go ahead and tithe it. And you also are allowed to put stuff on the flame to keep warm for Shabbat. Do you remember something called a blech? Yeah. I love that word, blech. It's one of my favorite words. So,
it's a Yiddish.
Yeah, the translation is a blech.
Thing on the stove.
It's the thing. The thing to keep stuff warm.
It was it was a rectangle of metal.
I have one now. It's a piece of metal that and you keep the fire on Shabbat, and you put the cholent on there to keep it warm. Anything you want to keep warm Shabbat, because you're not allowed to heat food on Shabbat. Okay, so if you're not sure if Shabbos has started or not, you're allowed to put stuff on the blech. If you're sure it's not Shabbos, you can't. If you're sure that it's not Shabbos, of course you put it on. The question is if you're not sure. So that's one of those things. If you're not sure, you can put stuff on the blech, on the flame, whatever, to keep it warm through Shabbat. Okay.
Is there a blech store?
You buy it at the hardware store.
Blech Incorporated. You can buy them at Costco. You buy 100 at a time.
Yes.
Industrial size blechs. I don't even know if they exist anymore.
Check Google.
Yes.
How far back does the Eruv, when was it first mentioned?
So it's mentioned in the Mishnah. That's the oldest.
Mention of Eruv?
Well, it's mentioned in several Mishnahs. This isn't the only mention of it, but it's mentioned in the Mishnah, which means that...
the Talmud, there was no mention of...
No. So before the Mishnah, there's no mention of it. Remember, the Mishnah comes before the Gemara. So the Mishnah is, roughly 200. So there's no mention of it before the year 200, which doesn't mean they didn't exist.
Right.
There's not a lot of writing before the year 200.
Before that.
So yes, probably there were. So the Mishnah knows about them. So there's no sense that the Mishnah invented it. The Mishnah has rules for it. Yeah.
So
We're about to learn some of the rules. Yeah.
I'm sorry, probably mentioned it. Does that mean it's a form of segregation? This thread around?
No. So we'll see what the Eruv is. But the Eruv is that you're not allowed to carry outside of your household with an on Shabbat.
Right.
And an Eruv, you can actually make a boundary to say it's not just my house anymore; it's my whole neighborhood. My whole neighborhood becomes my house. And if you put a string, like a walled city, a boundary. Because you can carry within a walled, like a courtyard or a city, anything that looks like this is a neighborhood. But you need a string, so you put a string up every Shabbat. Okay, I'll read a little bit more. And then Gemara Mina Hani mile. So what's this? Where do these words come from? That's literally what the question is. But it means, what's the scriptural referent for this? How do we know from Torah that all this stuff is true? Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, Amar Kra. Scripture says, V'yadata ki shalom alecha ufakada navcha v'lo techta. So the verse that we're going to, it's interesting, the verse comes from Job. The verse that proves all of this. Now remember, they're asking, how do you know that we're supposed to ask these questions? It doesn't say, how do you know that we're supposed to do these things? Like to tithe before Shabbat or to set up an Eruv. The question is, how do we know that we're supposed to ask ourselves these questions? And so the question is, and so the proof text is, you should know, you should have a feeling that there's peace in your tents, and you shall make sure in your dwellings that there's no sin. So the two things, we accomplish two things by these statements. One is peace of mind. We ask ourselves, did I remember to tithe? Because if I don't ask myself, all through Shabbos I'm going to think, oh my gosh, did I do it? Did I not do it? And Shabbos won't be peaceful. So peace of mind is an important value. And also, we want to make sure that we're not sinning. And how do we make sure we're not sinning? We ask ourselves before Shabbos, did I do all the stuff I needed to do? So that verse from Job shows that we want to be careful we're not sinning, and we want to have a sense of peace of mind. How do we get there? Remind yourself, 20 minutes before Shabbos, remind yourself, did I do these things? Just because you have the rules doesn't mean that you're going to do them. How do you know you're going to do them? You remind yourself. Of course, why does my wife give me lists of things to do? Because otherwise I won't do them. I know I'm supposed to do them, but looking at the list will remind me that I'm supposed to do them. Okay, stop there. Good place to stop.